I am so excited to be back for another edition of Leadership COGS. And this week we are talking about change fatigue. So, hi, friends, I'm Farnia Fresnel. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, this series is called Leadership COGS. And again, today our topic is change fatigue. Nobody likes change. Well, very few people like change. If you don't know me, again, as I was in financial services for a number of years, and I realized there was a gap in my understanding. And my difference in culture, it really caused me to struggle. And so 12 years ago, I used what I knew and studied and I coached to fill my gaps. And that led me to launch the Lenserf Group. In that time, we've worked with thousands of leaders across 44 countries to soar past their limits. And what I'd like to say is in that work, what we've been able to identify is four pillars that keep people in motion. And we call these four pillars COGS. Now, the C is for celebrating consistency, which is a really important attribute of high performance. O is for taking more ownership of not only your being, but also your actions. G is for growing outside of the glue that oftentimes keeps us stuck. And S is the stamina to stretch into whatever happens to be next for you, in spite of the discomfort that oftentimes comes with stretching. So I would like to start with a story. I know as we stand today, a lot of leaders everywhere are navigating restructuring and role shifts. There may be technology transitions as a lot of companies are starting to adopt AI more and more and more, and it's shifting how we work. There may be strategy pivots that are happening, or it might be that your org chart is changing in some kind of a way. But what tends to happen is that the real cost is hidden. And that cost is in disconnection, disengagement, and oftentimes in declining trust. So, as many generations now are working side by side in the workplace and businesses have become more culturally fluid with outsourcing, we're hearing complaints, and I call them complaints, but they're soft complaints from our clients about how hard it is to work across generations and across time zones with old and new technology oftentimes working simultaneously and sometimes ineffectively together. As I hear those kinds of things, I just wonder if any of you might have experienced or heard any version of that. We recently wrote an article about switching hats and what happened when two groups for the same company, two groups, they approached a new situation in two very different ways. The short of the article was that this first group was working with a project that was about to launch. And what you saw was that they were so excited about, there was anticipation there. They were just ready to get started. And the second group, well, they started, but they also were empowered with just history of what went wrong when they tried this thing in the past. And unfortunately, that second group, they struggled to unsee the baggage from that past attempt. So rather than stepping into the project with fresh eyes, they defaulted to stepping into the project with lots of critique. And they led with critique. So I'd also love to see in the chat, have you ever experienced that, or show of hands? Have you ever experienced that? Any version of that where you can't unsee the baggage of a project, of a change, or of something or someone on your team? Either way, in both cases, we're talking about change. And by definition, a project brings about change. But that second group was experiencing fatigue. And so we're talking about the O for ownership as a symptom, G as glue and the possibility of growth if you turn it around, and if you allow yourself to S or stretch into acceptance of that change. So, what is change fatigue? It's a mental, emotional, and sometimes physical exhaustion where people experience this oftentimes when they're exposed to too much change over a sustained period of time. And here's the thing, like, you may not always know that this is change fatigue. So what does it actually look like? Well, it might be low engagement. When you have a room full of people on a call, a virtual room, right? Or a room full of people physically in the room, but you can hear the pin drop. And and what's funny is people are quiet and they actually don't take initiative. You're like, "Oh, are you sick? What's going on in the room?" They're quiet. That's a sign of low engagement. Or how about this? You hear so much of the baggage or the, "Ah, this is never going to work." With the eye roll. Did you see that? Did you catch that? With the eye roll. And that signifies kind of virtual resignation, like they're just not with you. And they're really resigned to the success that might happen. And they're accepting that this is just another big time waster, meaning it's another attempt that's just not going to work. So, what else happens? Well, declining trust. So, change initiators are evil. So, these people who want us to change, the theys, there becomes a they, and the theys want change. So, you'll hear people talking about malice tied to the change, and they might do that in closed forums or they might do that publicly, and that's not helpful. You might also notice decision fatigue. So if you are here right now, depending on what time zone you're in, you've probably gone through lots of decision making already. From the time you chose what toothpaste to use, your choice of clothing, your route to work, what time you were going to start that day, what kind of things you were going to eat, what were you going to pack for lunch. By the time something changes our routines, it takes a lot of energy. If something is changing our routines, it takes energy because now you have to realign everything. The change is not just about the change. There was a Gartner study, and when the study was done, it shared that the average company underwent 5 major enterprise changes in 2022. 2022, that's 1 year. And of those changes, 73% of employees reported moderate to high stress. Now, if 73% of your people are stressed because of something that you're doing or the 5 things that you're doing, I can assure you that you're not working optimally and that innovation is likely not happening for the folks that are in those companies. And I wonder, I see a note there with change, are you not giving up something to gain something much better? Yeah, perhaps. So I'm just want to get a little bit clear on that, John. So with change, are you not giving up something to gain something much better? Oftentimes that is the goal. So change leaders are oftentimes trying to initiate difference so that people can experience something much, 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 much better. But when it first happens, depending on how we handle it, that can lead people to not want to experience that version of better, in spite of how much better it might actually be. So these are some of the things that you might see in spite of the wonderful intentions. And what we also know is that change fatigue symptoms might also look like burnout, right? Even with your highest performers who tend to do anyway, like they're like, oh, okay, we're just in it. Doesn't feel good, but we're going to do it anyway. But you might even see dwindling of support with your highest performers. And that is a sign of fatigue. So sometimes people say, yeah, it's not the change itself. People just want to be negative. And that's not actually what's happening. It's usually a capacity issue. Even positive change can drain energy. For example, the pace. When people don't have enough time to recover and they're hit with yet another change, there's likely no capacity left. Like you're talking about a battery that has not had time to charge. If anybody has a mobile device, and most of us do, you put that mobile device to charge probably overnight or periodically during the day. Now, if you don't actually give it time to charge, but you're using that mobile device for 4 or 5 days, chances are you're not going to have any battery left. And that is like pace, capacity issue. If we've never given individuals time to charge, then there's no capacity left. Another thing that comes up is volume. So when your technology, when your process, if your leadership, senior leadership, and the roles on your projects or on your teams are all moving at the same time, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. And that becomes a capacity issue. Capacity to digest, to process, and then to perform. What else? Lack of clarity. So during times of change, uh, there's opportunity to lead the way with crisp communication. Foggy messaging and a lot of unknowns leave people with little capacity because they're trying, I talked about change fatigue, they're trying to parse through, read in between the lines to find out what do they really have to pay attention to? In addition to all this changing stuff, what do they really have to pay attention to? When there's no clarity, that's not apparent. And lastly, lack of control. If you know, any one of you, if you know that change is coming and you're struggling with how you might relay it to your folks, consider this. You can involve them in the process. It is here in the midst of the muck that you can bolster ownership and actually help them in regaining some control. And it might not be a control over the whole thing because you probably don't even have control over the whole thing. But by involving them into something small, the change shifts from something that's happening to you to something that you're part of and contributing to in some small way. So you're along for the ride. They didn't leave you at the bus stop. And for those of you that have this kind of insight, so neurologically, the way the brain works is that the brain craves certainty. So the brain wants answers. And when things are shifting, it actually activates a stress response. And what happens when the stress response is we no longer have access or ready access to the same responsiveness. We no longer have access to the same kind of innovation because we've shut down that part of the brain. We're stressed. This is fight or flight. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with fight or flight. In fact, I wonder how many of you, even today, we just got into August. And depending on where you are, there might be people out of the office. And if you're with us today, chances are you're in the office. If you're experiencing some dose of fight or flight because someone's unavailable for a period of time, maybe a stakeholder's gone for a couple of weeks on holiday, drop that in the chat. If you might be experiencing any of that right now, lack of control in your immediate environment. So I'm talking about what's generally at the heart of change fatigue. But let's talk about what not to do here. I am a total advocate of communication and offering insight where insight's available, or sometimes even saying that insight no is not available. People have to kept abreast of what's actually going on. But if you only talk about your goal, you're going to lose. You're going to lose loyalty. You're probably going to lose your top performers, and you're going to lose a real opportunity to get closer to your team and to everyone else going through that change, through the difficult moment. You're going to lose that. So stay away from over communicating outcomes and under communicating empathy. If you have the privilege of managing people, know that they're impacted beyond just what you can see. So what you see it during a 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, depending on how you guys work, what you see is just a sliver of what's actually affected by that change. Chances are they're changing their lifestyle. I'll give you an example. Return to the office. I have a good friend who had to return to office, and the challenge this person was going through was they no longer were able to do drop off for their family member, their child. No longer able to do drop off at the same time, so they showed up to a meeting late. And with that showing up late, they're, it's kind of like, oh, late again, late again, late again. And or taking a couple, oh, I have to, this change is happening and I have to do drop off. And In some instances, they were not met warmly with that kind of shift. So consider this. As you introduce change, what are those things that can be flexible? Everything can't be, and eventually everyone's going to get on board. But what are those things that can be flexible? And where is there opportunity or even a runway for people to be able to adjust? That's empathy. Yes, there's a goal. Let's lead through this change. It's going to be better on the other end. Yes. And as we get there, recognize that sometimes people getting on board might take a little bit longer. The other thing, consider this. When stressed again, some leaders, it might be you even, might choose avoidance. And it might feel like this if you check in with folks. You might hear complaints, so you don't check in with folks because you don't want to hear the complaints. Now, by not checking in, you don't actually not hear the complaints. You're just avoiding the complaints. Like you're just avoiding them. They're still there. You're just not hearing them. So empathy also works here. And a listening ear is going to earn you more trust and more buy-in over time simply because you were with somebody during a chaotic time. People remember. People remember. Not to say much is going to change. You probably can't re-empower anyone, but just listening makes a difference. What else to not do? Speaking of buy-in, well, just because you don't hear anything, it doesn't mean that everyone's on board. Chances are they might be resigned from even trying to make themselves heard. They're quiet. And that silence doesn't mean, oh, I'm ready. I'm totally on board. Doesn't mean they're on board. It just means they're silent and likely resigned. The last thing here, I'll talk to this. And I'm guilty of this. I just have to acknowledge that. I'm guilty of wanting the best outcomes at all times. I always want the best thing to happen, the best for the masses. I spend a lot of time even visualizing what can go right and how I can contribute and how my people can contribute to making it go right. But pushing positivity during a really challenging time can feel dismissive and can even shut down vulnerability. So if you're happy-go-lucky or like, oh no, this is going to be all fine, 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 fine. If in the middle of the change, somebody finds something that's not fine or even not worse than the change felt initially, chances are they're not going to bring that up to you. You're not going to know about it. Or you might be the last one to know about it because of the fear that if I say this, I'm the bearer of bad news. I'm the Grim Reaper. I don't want to be the Grim Reaper on Positive Pam, right? Like I don't want to be that. So just watch that. Some people call it toxic positivity, but this is, yes, you may get through the change, but fast forwarding past the process and the change curve, right? People feel things and they have to be ready. They have to see themselves in the change, give them opportunities to do that. And if you push past that, you lose something along the way. So what's next? I'll encourage you to try this. Nobody expects everything to be perfect at work. They just don't expect everything to be perfect, but they also don't want to feel alone when things go wrong. So what can you actually do? One, as change is happening, I encourage you to name the fog, like name it. There are lots of things that you won't know, but what do you know? What can you honestly tell them? What is pending a resolution? What metrics are you trying to apply to determine success? Like what are you going to apply when you've arrived? What are those metrics that they can monitor too? What are you starting to pay attention to? Even if you don't have answers, you can share those things. What are you paying attention to? What are those things that you're monitoring? Number two, while a lot of things are unstable during changing times, what can you do to create stability? How can you, as a leader, anchor your team in what's not going to change? For example, just because a change has happened, it doesn't mean that your values are going to be different, or your meeting times or rhythms are going to be different, or how you celebrate or acknowledge people. That's not going to change. Or even the support structure that might be there, that might not be changing either. So if you ever had like a family tradition, like how you spend holidays or something else, you know that small routines can become like emotional anchors. And this isn't, please don't think or walk away from here saying she's encouraging us to just hug everybody. And that, no, that's not what this is. But small routines can become emotional anchors that allow people to hold on to something as they go through the change, feel stability as they go through the change. And in times of chaos, they're soothing and they serve as a source of encouragement. And lastly, you could always help your people to feel seen. A lot of times people take change personally, and why they're tired and feeling fatigued is because they feel like they've done so much in the past. Like that system or that process was created at one point, and they were on the founding team that created that system or that process. And now that this thing is changing, they might personally feel obsolete. Like, oh, you're moving to another system. You need me. You don't need me. Or this isn't going to be like, I was so proud that I was on the founding team. I used to talk about that. That was part of my identity in this place. And now that you're changing it, you don't need me or what I bring or my specialty anymore. So ask yourself as a leader, how can you acknowledge or even celebrate the contribution from the past as you go through the transition to the future? Perhaps you can ask, like, "Oh, what has been hard about this? Where do you need more clarity? Or what do I or other members of leadership need to know?" Because there might be some secret sauce that someone who's feeling like they're being left behind might have that can empower you to go through the change even more successfully. What you have the power to do is listen. Listen without fixing, but just validate what's coming up and prepare for the next round. So we're going to wrap for today. I encourage you to try something this week. A couple things you could do. You could hold a clarity meeting for just a few minutes to summarize what you do know. You could do that. It only takes about 5 minutes. You can check in directly with one or two people and just continue to do that as you go through the change. Put it on your calendar, 10, 15 minutes. Another thing you can do even this week, even when you drop this call, you can name a constant. What is one thing that your team can count on or even count on you for? We often define team norms with folks, and I'm happy to work with you on doing exactly that. I thank you for joining us today. I'll be back in just about 2 weeks, and our episode then is going to be called Bias, Brains in Business. If you have any questions or if you want to connect, just scan this QR code. I'd love to connect with you. I thank you so much for being here. Take care and be well.